Okay, it's Saturday, May 22nd, 2021, and I'm just leaving my hotel in Naples, Florida, which is pretty close to where I took my airboat tours yesterday. And now I'm heading back along US Highway 1 to spend the entire day in the Everglades National Park. I've already explained in the earlier part of this video why I had a hotel in Naples instead of Homestead or somewhere. I'm going to be winging it here. I can't say exactly what I'm going to do in what order, but it's going to involve pretty much whatever the Park Service recommends within the time frame that I have available today. I can actually overflow a little bit into tomorrow morning as well, if need be. But I have another crisis that my cell phone refused to take a charge last night from the old reliable Verizon AC Wallwart phone charger. There's a bit of a story there, but I like it just because of its form factor, and it fits into my power strips better than some other ones, and it's been working great. I think the problem is with the connectors. I think the cables have flexed just one too many times, and it was making an intermittent connection. So also on today's agenda is to find a phone store that's open at an hour when I'm near a phone store instead of in the middle of the Everglades, where I can pick up a new charger that does not require an adapter. I've got the USB, I think it's the USB-C type connector, and I found a lot of general stores don't seem to carry that, or if they do, they only carry the adapter, and I'm going to try to get the one that's purpose made for phones that have the C-type connector. Anyway, a bit of trivia there. At 9:15 in the morning, I'm approaching the Everglades National Park's Shark Valley Loop Road entrance. Credit cards only. Shark Valley Visitor Center.
Next few hours. Let's see. Okay, so right out of the start here, we've got an alligator on my side of the tram. It's out there getting a little sun here after being out in the out at night where it's getting cooled off. Before we get into any additional wildlife spotting, let me give you a little history here about the park. Okay, Everglades National Park was declared a national park in December of 1947 by President Harry Truman. This park consists of 1.5 million acres, which, to give you a little perspective, it's larger than the state of Delaware. It's also the largest wilderness area east of the Mississippi. It's the third largest national park in the continental United States. The second largest is Yellowstone, and the first and the largest is Death Valley. So how many here expected to see a swamp when they came out here? Show of hands. Okay, a few of you. Okay, well, this part of the Everglades is not a swamp. It's, when it's dry like this, it's called a sawgrass prairie. And as the wet season moves on and we start getting higher water levels here, it turns into a freshwater slough. Mostly by rainwater, and the fact that there's a slight difference in elevation. At the visitor center we were 7 feet above sea level. When we get to the observation tower we're going to drop to about 14 inches. But that slight difference in elevation is enough to allow the water to move. Now it doesn't move very fast. At the height of the rainy season it'll move about 1/4 mile a day. And ultimately it ends up on the west coast of Florida, exiting out the Shark River, which is about 35 miles southwest of the observation tower. Now right now we're just coming out of the dry season and starting the wet season. We haven't had a lot of rainfall yet. So you can see this part of the prairie is very dry. But as we progress further south, you'll see more water appear as we get to where it's moved to. Sunup comes around, they've cooled off quite a bit, so they need to spend some time in the sun to get their body temperature back up. Like all reptiles, they're cold-blooded, so they have to use their environment to control their body temperature, and ideally they prefer to keep their body temperature between 75 and 85 degrees. All the other gators use the same trail over and over again, and you're going to see that they lead in many cases to these clover pipes into this road, which you can already notice here we're starting to see a little more water than we were when we first just left the visitor center, and we'll see more of it as we progress south. Now 80% of this part of the Everglades is made up by this huge monoculture of sawgrass that you see all around you. Sawgrass is uniquely adapted to this environment because it can grow in very dry and low nutrient soil conditions. So the soil here is only a few inches deep. And once you get below that, you hit a bed of limestone, and that limestone drops down to a depth of 2 miles below us. It's part of an ancient coral reef that made itself to the Florida Peninsula. So the topsoil is very thin, and it's mostly powdered limestone with some organic material from decayed sawgrass. But the sawgrass has adapted to this and thrives in this low nutrient environment. It gets its name from spines that are upward pointing spines that are on the edges of the sawgrass. And that spine is not, those spines are not for protection for the grass, but it's an adaptation for it to collect water during the dry season. So during the dry season, in the early morning, any dew that condenses out of the air collects on these spikes, the sort of spines, and then it runs down the spine and gets channeled to the sawgrass's roots. So that's how it helps keep it alive during the dry season. Now the other 20% of the plant life out here is contained in these various tree islands that you see all around you. These clusters of different kinds of trees. And we're going to talk about those. There's going to be 4 here that we discuss. forms a small ridge here, and that ridge collects some additional soil. And it's composed mostly of bay trees, cocoa plum, and wax myrtle. Now they don't stay completely dry. During the height of the rainy season they can flood over, but these trees are able to tolerate that. But you also notice that all those trees and bushes in there are very densely packed, and that makes great habitat for the smaller animals here in the Everglades. So you'll find mice, snakes, frogs, spiders, scorpions, small songbirds, things of that nature in there, because it gives them protection against the larger predators in the area. The bushes and trees are so tightly packed that hawks and large herons and gators cannot get in there. Okay, and we got another alligator here on Taylor's side, right here on the bank. Osteoderms, and they're made of bone, and also have a lot of capillaries flowing through them, and they're just below the skin. So while he's lying here in the sun, and his back is warming up, and his osteoderms are warming up, it's warming the blood passing through his capillaries, and then it'll circulate through the rest of his body to help warm him up. Stone that collects water, and willows are water-loving trees, so you see these light kind of lime green leaf trees all around here. Those are coastal willow trees, and if you were to walk back into that willow head, you'd find a fairly deep pool of water. What happens is you have the initial depression that collects the water, the willow trees grow up around it. As they drop their leaves, and those leaves fall into the water and decay, it forms a substance called tannic acid, which is a mild corrosive and softens the limestone. And alligators will go in there and they'll start digging out that soft limestone. So over many decades and many alligators, that initial depression gets enlarged quite a bit. So you might walk back into this willow head and walk into a 10-foot deep pool of water that's probably 20 feet in diameter. And because the gators help make these things, these willow heads are also called gator holes. And it's important during the dry season, not only for the alligators, but a lot of other aquatic life that would otherwise die if they couldn't find a place with water to stay. About 3 to 4 feet long, very easy prey for a number of animals out here, big herons, hawks, and other alligators. Alligators are cannibalistic. Area of limestone is not table flat. It has ridges and depressions, and these other pieces of coral around here are also known as pinnacle rock. Okay, so we're coming up here just to the side of the tram here. We're going to come to our third type of tree island we're going to talk about. This is called a Cypress dome, and it gets its name a couple of reasons. This one also forms around a depression in the limestone, and if you were to go back inside there, you'd find a kind of a shallow, bowl-shaped depression that was full of water. And so it's sort of an inverted dome, if you will. And also, if you look at the trees towards the center closest to the depression with the water are the tallest ones, and then they get smaller as they get out to the perimeter. Now these trees are called dwarf bald cypress trees. They are conifers, but they're not evergreen. They do lose their needles. Typically, around the start of the dry season, they lose their needles as a way to conserve water. And in a similar process as with the willowhead, when these needles fall into the water and decay, they form tannic acid, which softens the limestone and the depreciation of how high the water level got around here during the last wet season. Cypress trees are basically, their wood is waterproof, fire resistant, and termite resistant. Okay, coming up on Kristen's side, right, you'll see we got two gators here. And normally when you see two gators together, that's typically going to be a male and female. We're still getting towards the end of the alligator breeding season. So the smaller of the two would be the female, and the larger the male. They'll spend time together in a courtship ritual of sorts, and then when the female signals the male that she's ready, they'll mate. And once they mate, the female will go off on her own to build a nest out of sawgrass and mud to lay her eggs in. You won't typically ever see two males this close together unless they're about to fight. The males will fight over territory, females and food. Another aside here too, the Park Service has aged these cypress trees at about 150 years. And that's not just the big ones in the center. It's also the same for these small ones right here next to the road. They just won't get any bigger because they're root bound in the limestone now. Because the soil. Flying off my side of the tram here. Pyramid shape, with the two very tall trees in the middle. And this particular tree island, that tallest tree in the middle is a Gumbo Limbo tree. But you'll also find mahogany trees in here, poison wood, cocoa plum. And if you look in this little cutaway here that's been put in here by the Park Service, you can see there's quite a rise in elevation there. This hardwood hammocks form where there's a couple of feet worth of elevation limestone where soil collects, and you can have an elevation inside there of maybe 7 or 8 feet above the surrounding area. So it stays dry all the time, even in the wet season in there. And it's a spot where any mammals that come through this area can take refuge in there and dry off a little bit. So you might find raccoons, bobcats, possibly deer, white-tailed deer, Florida panther or black bear in there so they can get up out of the water. It's also during the height of the rainy season here. Summertime, it gets very hot out here, 95 or higher degrees. It's about 10 degrees cooler inside those hardwood hammocks under that canopy. Native Americans that used to live out here in the Everglades also made use of the hardwood hammocks. They would typically use one to have their living quarters in. They would give you a small gator over there. They typically use one of the hardwood hammocks for meal preparation, and a third one for growing vegetables and other food feed. Resulted in the construction of this road also resulted in the construction of the observation tower that we're making a stop at here at the halfway point. before, these borrow pits are over 20 feet deep, so they're full of water year-round. And because of that depth, too, there's a lot of large fish in these small lakes here. So it's a popular spot for our diving birds. As a matter of fact, we've got one coming up here on the pond apple bush on the far bank. That is a female Anhinga. You can tell it's a female because of the tan-colored neck, head, and breast. The males are all black. Anhinga is a diving bird. They'll actually swim underwater and spear fish with that pointy beak of theirs. And then after they've been in the water for a bit, they'll come up on land or on a bush like this and to dry off. You'll sometimes see them often with their wings spread, with their back to the sun, to get their body temperature back up and to dry their wings off. Anhinga is a Brazilian word. It means devil bird, and that's because if we're able to get a close look at an Anhinga's eye, it's red, and the Brazilian natives consider that a mark of evil. They're also sometimes called snake birds because when they surface in the water, and all you can see is the head and neck. It looks very much like a snake's head and neck. This one looks like it could be the male. Looks like it's got the all black head. We'll be able to get some closer looks at Anhingas on the second half of the trip when we come back along the canal. But you can see how he's got his wings spread, and as they see the sun, they will warm up and dry off. The smaller blackbird that is on the same bush with the Anhinga is a boat-tailed grackle. We have a little colony of them nesting in that group of cattails by the borrow pit. Alligators are aquatic reptiles, so they can go for months at a time without eating. But they can only go about 2 weeks without having a source of water nearby, not just to drink, but also to use for regulating their body temperature. That's why these culverts and gator holes and borrow pits are so important for their survival during the dry season. Okay, we have a great blue heron just landing over here on this side of the trail. That's our largest wading bird here. He is what's known as a fight and strike predator, which means he'll sit very still watching the water, and when he sees something that looks tasty, he'll do a lightning thrust with that neck of his and grab it in his bill and eat it. And moon chain out here. So almost every other animal here in the Everglades at one point in time or another in its life cycle relies on the parrot for food or shelter or a place to lay its eggs. The parrot also is photosynthetic, so it produces a lot of oxygen. It also filters whatever nutrients are in the water out of its own use, so that's why you'll see the water looks so clear around the parrot white, but it's actually performing a function of filtering the water. And then as the dry season approaches, you'll see it look less like these hot dog bun shapes moving in the water. It's going to come together and form like a mat on the surface of the water. And as the water level decreases, it'll settle onto the damp soil beneath. So it serves a few functions. One is it keeps that soil below damp. It keeps it from blowing away in the dry season. Also, many of the aquatic organisms out here spawn right before the start of the dry season. At least one's probably close to 10 feet long. It looks like off in the distance there's another smaller alligator out in the distance there in the shallow water and grass. Comes in two parts. We'll do the shark part first. Back in the 1500s, Juan Leon was exploring Florida out of the Fountain Canyon. And he was coming down the Gulf Coast of Florida. He reached the point where he and his men needed to get some fresh water. So they pulled into this river to get the fresh water, and they were amazed to see sharks swimming around in the freshwater river. That's something they had never ever encountered before. Decided to name the River of the Sharks, which we now have shortened to Shark River. And the sharks he saw were three species, basically the bull shark, lemon shark, and black-tip shark. And these sharks bear live young called pups, and they have to bear them in fresh water because the pups can't tolerate the full salinity that you find in the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico initially. So they live part of their lives in fresh water, and then eventually they go into brackish water while they're adapting, and then finally out in the open sea. Now the valley part takes a little bit more imagination. The technical definition of a valley is a low point between two high points. So as I mentioned earlier in the trip, when we get to the observation tower, we're going to be about 6 feet above sea level. So if you go east to Miami, the elevation rises to about 25 to 27 feet above sea level. And if you were going to head west towards Big Cypress and Naples, the elevation would rise to about 18 feet. So technically, we are the low point between two high points. This is just a very broad, shallow valley. This is also, this whole Shark River area, or Shark Valley area here, the full name of it is the Shark River Valley Slough. And this is the headwaters of the Shark River. So all this water that comes down here in the form of rain or whatever, and proceeds south and then southwest, will eventually empty into the Shark River on the Gulf Coast. But Shark River Valley Slough is really too long a name to print on maps and wall caps and t-shirts, so we just shortened it to Shark Valley. So this is basically, free exploration time for you. It's about 10:25 right now, so like you back on board at 1:45. So have fun.
The Borrow Pit Trail. This trail skirts the edge of a borrow pit created during oil exploration before the park was established. The open water mimics an alligator hole with seasonally abundant wildlife. The higher ground mimics a bayhead, small, dense, and impenetrable, an island of higher ground that provides a kind of oasis for plant and animal life. So I just have a couple of minutes to walk down here. Lots of tripping hazards here. kind of muddy down there. I think I'll avoid that. Hi. Well, I think it's more of the same that way, and it looks progressively muddier and general messier, so rather than get my shoes all full of mud. I had to wait till the trail cleared a little bit. There's a whole bunch of people walking around here in flip-flops, stumbling and slipping all over the place. And I think to myself once again, why is it that so many Americans think that flip-flops are the ideal everyday shoes? Just amazes me. The engineer in me says it's beyond belief.
Yeah.
Anybody want to be missing anybody from their right? Okay. Going to do a slow drive-by of the path here just to see if we see anybody running and waving their arms. If we do, don't be rude, wave back. Okay, coming up on Kristen's side of the tram, if he sticks around, we got a nice blue here and closing on the bank here. This road, or this canal here, is basically, it's deep enough to be full all the time with groundwater, but it's stagnant water. So this is actually more of a swamp type environment than what we go through in the snow area. The water is very nutrient rich, which is why I see all the plant life in and around it. It's also why it's not quite as clear, because the paraphyte can't grow in this water because it's too many nutrients. A lily pad type plant you see out here is called spatterdock. When it blooms a small yellow blossom that's only about the size of a golf ball and never really opens up all the way. But it's a food source for our aquatic turtles and some of our birds. On the road, one of the two locations up here. One is just 50 miles south of the visitor center. The other is where the observation tower is that you're just out. So the first location, they didn't strike it out. out where the observation tower is, they did strike oil, but it had a lot of contaminants in it, primarily silica and sulfur. And back in the 1940s, they didn't have an economical way to refine that, so they kept the well and decided to explore elsewhere, which was good for the Everglades. Now, initially, they tried to sell this land, of course, back in the 1940s, but they wanted to buy land that was underwater most of the time and full of alligators and mosquitoes. So after trying that, sorry about that, PA system's acting up. So after trying to allow to sell the land, they made a deal with the government. The federal government took the land back and gave them tax credits. But overall, didn't end up suffering too badly over it. They ended up exploring for a little while up and down to Mexico and found that they need it. And nowadays you'll build them better as ExxonMobil. Find some fish that were released here accidentally as a result of Hurricane Andrew when a tilapia farm was destroyed, and so they got loose in the environment, so we find tilapia here. And we also find some, okay, we got a turtle here. Looks like one of our yellow-bellied sliders on the far bank, sunning its health. But you also find fish in this them of a piano keyboard, so some people also nicknamed Anhinga the piano bird. This one's also a female. You can tell by the light-colored head, neck, and breast. Anhingas like this canal because it's deep enough for them to dive into, and there's plenty of fish in there for them to eat. As I was saying before, this canal is another refuge for many of our aquatic species during the dry season. On wheels, passing through the Everglades. Okay, coming up on the Kristen side here at the far bank, you get a look at some swamp hyacinth blossoming. So we're just getting into the height of our wildflower season here in the Everglades. Another one you'll see very close to the side of the road here. These plants with the light pink blossom and kind of grayish-green flowers, that's called marsh fleabane. Native Americans used to use the plant mixed with a few other substances as a homemade mosquito repellent. Great blue and bright. Again, these are probably a year and a half old. The mother will watch over up to 3 generations of her young. So it's not unusual sometimes to see anything from hatchlings to what we call teenagers. all in the same area. Once the alligators get to be about 3 years old, they're old enough to start looking at their siblings as much. So the mother will start chasing the older ones away. You may not always see her, but she's always nearby. You know, these young alligators, if they feel threatened in any way, they'll let out like a chirping type noise that the runner hears, and if she hears it, she goes running, and at that point, she's the most dangerous animal in the Everglades, an alligator protecting her babies. As I was saying, you know, we always appreciate people coming out here, taking an interest in learning about the Everglades, and hopefully coming up here all sunbathing here on the torpedo grass on the far bank. And coming up here on the far bank, another couple of babies, and it looks like baby mama standing guard. Looks like the number 3 is sitting down in the nest. The other 2 are sitting up, standing up. And these birds are about ready to be on their own from their parents. They also typically have to learn how to swim before they can fly so that they can catch food. But until then, they're still pretty good about hopping from branch to branch and getting around.
Alright, after a very nice, much better than I expected, 2-hour tour of the Shark Valley part of the Everglades National Park, I'm getting back on the main drag up here. And heading for the main visitor center. Probably about
turn right at the stop sign.
Better part of an hour's drive from now. It's 11:44, so probably if I grab a quick bite of lunch, I'll still have a good chunk of this afternoon to explore that area.
Continue on US 41.
Couldn't really ask for much better weather, although if it was less windy it would help the videos from an audio standpoint. Okay, I just came in through the main gate at Everglades National Park, and immediately we're confronted by something that looks very much like the Everglades. Surprise, surprise. And my first stop is the Royal Palm. It just says Royal Palm. I guess there will be signs. Yeah. There's supposed to be the so-called Gumbo Limbo Trail, which, as I already said, is something I'm visiting mostly just out of nostalgia. And then there's also some sort of a historic Nike base right next to it. I know that the US had Nike bases scattered all over the place, often in kind of strange places like swamps and so on. So it doesn't really surprise me that there would be one here. Royal Palm turnoff, okay. Well, that's the turnoff, it's not the road. Site off to the right. We'll hit that on the way back. Makes a little loop up ahead. I'm surprised this place isn't busier on a weekend than it is. Maybe it's because it's the off season. I always get a kick out of those signs. The real sign should say, "Don't leave valuables in sight in your vehicle," but they so often condense it to just "Don't leave valuables in your vehicle." You know, unless you live locally, chances are you're traveling and you can't possibly take valuables with you when you get out of the car at an attraction. Okay, trailhead of the Gumbo Limbo Trail and all that excitement. Woo! I try to picture myself about knee-high here. Hurricane Andrew's impact. The forest floor was dark, shaded by a thick canopy of treetops after the storm, and that's Hurricane Andrew. Sunlight found the ground everywhere. Andrew had ripped apart the canopy and smashed it to the ground, and the scene repeated in hammocks all along the storm's path. Without a thick canopy to provide shade, plants in a sun-soaked understory grew rapidly. But a protective canopy also retains heat and moisture. Without it, a forest is more vulnerable to frost and fire. So as you walk the trail, try to imagine having been here before it tore things apart. There's a very reflective photo showing what it was like before, and one right after Hurricane Andrew. The Gumbo Limbo Trail tunnels through a tropical hardwood hammock, a world dramatically different from the wide open slough. In the shadowy tangle of vegetation, the plants at first appear all alike and the wildlife non-existent, but the hammock contains a surprising variety of species that take unfamiliar forms. In the intense competition for light and space, the vegetation grows in layers. A botanist exploring this hammock in 1893 was so in awe of the profusion of bromeliads, don't know that name, royal palms, orchids, etc., that he suggested the area as a federal park. Okay. All I remember from my childhood was a meandering narrow path through a very jungly kind of area. So all that I remember from my childhood coming here, again roughly the age of 4 probably, was a long winding path. This seems about right, with very dense vegetation creating a jungly-like environment, and that it seemed very overwhelming, but I seem to recall really liking it and begging my parents to take me back, but I think they only did take me that one time. Solution holes. Mild organic acid from decaying plants and rainwater imperceptibly dissolved limestone to form this solution hole. During the dry season, wildlife can find water to drink, and sometimes these holes may be taken over by alligator, or an alligator. The level of water represents the groundwater table over the whole area. And right now, there's only a little bit of water down there. It's a good thing they have a path here, right? Okay, bedrock. Thousands of years ago, glacial periods alternately submerged and exposed Florida. At the same time, thick limestone beds were deposited. This rock is highly porous and water flows through it freely. Natural areas like Everglades allow rainwater to seep in and recharge this rock layer or aquifer. Many of us living in South Florida depend on this rock layer for fresh water. Pretty big tree. There's a sign that'll probably tell us all about it. Kind of a root or vine. On horizontally reaching branches overhead, orchids mingled with air plants. In a case of mistaken identity, a black and yellow zebra butterfly flutters around the multicolored Liguus tree snail, thinking it a flower. Such exquisite beauty has not been lost on the collector. Several species or color forms of these tropical residents are now rare or have been exterminated. Strangler fig. This tree has an amazing development. Fig seeds lodged in crevices on rough barked branches of other trees grow into temporary air plants. Descending roots entwine the host tree in their quest for soil. As the fig roots thicken and the host tree attempts to grow, the growing layers are choked off and the host eventually dies. The fig, a more effective competitor, is left alone in the sun. I was having some trouble reading that sign because about half the letters are wiped out. Even on the hottest days, the dense green roof overhead keeps the hammock cool and humid. Because of these moist conditions, fires normally stop short of hammocks and do not enter. Unlike fire-resistant pines and glades, hardwood hammock vegetation can be killed by fire. During a severe drought in 1945, fire did destroy part of this hammock. It will take many years before you can again walk in a jungle canopied by huge moss-covered live oaks. The Gumbo Limbo, Bursera cimaruba. Even the name of this tree sounds tropical. The peeling red bark suggests severe sunburn. No wonder tourist tree is another of its many names. Central Americans called it naked Indian. What uses it has? Planted branches take root and become rot-proof living fences. The wood was once used to carve merry-go-round horses. Resin provided medicinal salves, antidotes to poison wood and bee stings, preservatives for Indian canoes, and incense for the Mayas. Brews from the inner bark may have been the original chicken gumbo soup. These are all Gumbo Limbo trees here, I think. Nice little grove of them. Access road. I've only filmed about half of the trail, but it looks like we're back to the trailhead already, or just the other other trailhead, because we came in over there. So now for the Anhinga Trail. It's about twice as long as the one we just did. There is an alligator swimming over there. If I can't see well enough. Yeah, he went in right there. Hope he's still there. There's a boardwalk here that takes us off over the swampier areas. Hello, fishies. A whole bunch of those guys down here, whatever they are. Looking to the west and observing how elevation changes of only inches influence the sawgrass prairie, slough, and hardwood hammock. Paradise Key, sometimes called Royal Palm Hammock for its towering palms, stands larger and higher than most Everglades hammocks. The Florida Federation of Women's Clubs preserved and dedicated this area as Royal Palm State Park in 1916. Wide-scale drainage of Florida's wetlands in following decades created severe drought conditions that threatened the very existence of the Everglades. In 1945, uncontrolled wildfires spread across the parched landscape, destroying old-growth trees at Royal Palm. Concern for the future of the hammock and surrounding regions led to the establishment of Everglades National Park in 1947. Today, the amount, distribution, timing, and quality of water delivered to the Everglades National Park still determine the security of this preserved wilderness. You can kind of see in this picture, if it wasn't for all the glare, this darker green area, that's the Paradise Key, and it's an island of hardwoods surrounded by the slow-moving river of Taylor Slough, and the building where people to this particular area can go in and get information. And then the trail we're on comes over here, and I'm currently going around this lagoon on this curvy path that goes around this way. And the Gumbo Limbo Trail is right in this area. And there's another turn off. Scads and scads of fishies down there. The slough. As already mentioned, the slough is a slow-moving channel of water flowing through the sawgrass prairie. It supports myriad of life, from small microorganisms beneath the water's surface to the wading birds and alligators that grace its banks. Each is part of a natural food web, making it possible for each species to survive. The abundance of wildlife varies according to time of year and water level. Regardless of the season, you can come to know the inhabitants of the slough by being patient and observant. So the Anhinga, which this trail is named after, is one we saw earlier on the tram ride in Shark Valley. The Anhinga is also called the snake bird because of its neck. So there could be largemouth bass, sailfin mollies, tilapia, which is a native African fish, which escaped into here during one of the hurricanes, the Florida gar, the naiad, river otter, gambusia, pig frog, pie-billed grebe, Florida cottonmouth, common moorhen, Florida red-bellied turtle, American coot, Florida soft-shell turtle, greenback heron, American alligator, great blue heron, willow trees, raccoons, bluegills, bladderworts, spatterdocks, all sorts of stuff.
Hello. Hi, how are you? We're at Everglades National Park right now. Looks like this is the end of the road. No more boardwalk. And then the more or less straight shot back to the visitor center.